Hello everyone and welcome to June's membership video. This month we are diving into a project that I've been wanting to do for a while. We're gonna paint some lilies, and these are inspired from my garden, and I just planted these this year, and I've been looking at them every day and just wanting to kind of try out painting them and kind of recreating them in my journal. So you'll see that I started with a page that already had some collage paper down. So there was a couple collage papers, and then some white gesso, and then I'm using some Payne's gray and this like light blue gray to cover the whole background. And then I'm gonna take a stencil, one of the newer stencils from Dina Wakley. I can't remember what it's called. I'm horrible with names of stencils and people, but I'm gonna just wipe some of it away using a baby wipe, just to kind of give the background a little something to not be like just boring. So now I'm gonna start drawing, and I'm using a white Stabilo all pencil. I figured that white might show up a little bit better than black or like a normal graphite. And similar with the last month's supporter video, I'm just drawing the lines that I see. So I'm kind of focusing on the petals, and I start with the middle bunch of, you know, those things that come out from the middle, because I feel like that's a good reference point to start with. Ultimately, you know, I end up covering it up when I'm painting and stuff like that, but that's okay because I'm just starting off my drawing and giving myself, you know, a jumping off point, and then I'm just following the petals and creating lines. And I know that when I'm painting, I'm gonna cover up some of those lines, so I'm not too worried about having like the extra ones or anything like that. And so now this flower is a little off to the side, and it's kind of facing towards the right, I guess. And so some of the petals are at wonky angles. Like that one that I just drew is at this kind of weird angle, and it makes it look a little weird when you're just drawing it, right? You're like, oh, this kind of looks like not a flower, not what I was expecting it to be. But just like in the last video, whenever we paint them, it's going to change the way that they look, because we're gonna paint, add dimension with the petal, or with the paint for the petals, and we're also going to add in some lines around that to make it look more like a flower. And in the end, I think it comes out really close to what the picture looks like. So I'm drawing, looking at each flower separately rather than as like a whole picture, if that makes sense, and trying to layer things appropriately. And this becomes almost kind of a meditative process once you do it enough to, you know, just not kind of think too much and just look at the picture and draw a little bit. So I want to add a couple of these buds in, even though they're not really, like there's one in the picture, I still want to add them in just to give extra little flair, because I'm not going to do a whole lot of leaves or anything like that, because the leaves are kind of spiky for the plant, and I don't want to take away from the flower. So you'll see on my palette, which is just a book page, I have a ton of different pinks and oranges. And what I'm doing is I have this dry brush and I'm picking up a little bit of a color and going onto the petal, and then I'll pick up a different color, and I'm not rinsing my brush, so they kind of blend together. So this is a way that I like to do flowers. I've done them multiple different ways, you know, where you just color block and into the different like petal sections and stuff, but I really love, you know, the way that paint mixes together and changes things and gives you kind of an unexpected result. So this is one of my favorite ways, especially on a flower like this where the petals are so big. You can get a variation of color just by having so much like built up on your brush, and just letting everything kind of flow and mix together. So you'll see that I wiped off the brush onto my paper. I didn't put it in water because I don't want the paint to flow together. I don't want it to get too wet or too loose. I want that thicker consistency, and I want it to have those brush strokes and stuff like that. So I'm just, when I feel like my brush is getting a little too, you know, mixed up with a bunch of stuff, I just wipe it off onto, you know, there I did it onto like a journal page, so that way I can have more control over the colors that I'm using. So it's kind of a fun back and forth process where I just pick up the color that I want and I feel like would look good, and then I pick up another color that would mix well with that, and kind of go back and forth and layer. The colors in my flowers were very like orangey and like a brightish pink, so I'm that's what's inspiring me and trying to kind of emulate that and use a lot of the orange color in the base, and then kind of going over that with some pink and just mixing everything together. So I hope you understand what I'm saying when I'm saying just like pick up some color and, you know, let it mix on your petal, you know. And I think it's going to create those lines that you see in a flower, that so rather than drawing them, you're kind of creating them with the layers of the paint. You know, like when you look closely at a petal, there's all these lines and like texture, and I think that this is a good way to kind of mimic that naturally and also provide, you know, some interest to a petal, so it's not just like this one flat color, it's a whole bunch of colors, and when you look at it you're like, wow, you know, that's a bunch of, you know, there's pink, there's orange, there's red, there's, you know, all these different colors just sort of mixed in there. And also don't be afraid to paint over your middle lines, like those little thingies that come out. I can't remember the name of those things, but we're gonna go back and draw those in and paint them in later. So now I'm going to start on the stems, and this actually took a little longer than I anticipated. So I started with this green. It's called dark green from Golden. It's one of their matte colors, and I wanted to mix it with a little bit of turquoise because, again, I don't want it to just be like this flat green color, you know. I want different variations in there, and I feel like not only does it make it more interesting, but it's also more, like, slightly more realistic. And I found this, I had a straight flat brush, and then I found this little brush, so I decided to use that and just use a little bit of turquoise to kind of mix it up a little bit. And then I also have just a tiny dab of it's like a minty green color, and I use that too. And this is kind of, you know, adding those highlights and the lowlights and stuff. But I'm not like, maybe this is bad of me, but when I'm doing this, I'm not necessarily thinking about, oh, the light is coming from over here, and this is where I should add like a different color and highlight, because, you know, this is only in my journal, so I'm kind of just thinking about what I like and makes it look good. I started going up the side of this bud, and then I really didn't like that, because, like, when you look at the buds in the picture, they are still kind of green because they haven't fully, I don't want to say ripened, but that's the word that's coming to mind. They haven't fully gotten ready to open, so they're still a little green, and they're not totally pink, but I think it looks a little funky in my painting, so I decided not to go with that. So I put this lighter green color, and it ended up being more contrasty, I think, than I wanted it to be. So I have to go back and kind of tone it down a little bit with the regular green color, and then I sort of lost some of my turquoise. So I'm kind of just playing and going back and forth until I like what I'm looking at. So now I'm taking my regular Stabilo all pencil, and I'm going over the petals. I'm not trying to be perfect about this either, because I don't care if the lines are exactly on the petal or on the edge of the petal, or maybe they go over a little bit. It's not a big deal. Also, you could wait to do this until after you paint back in those middle thingies, and it may even be a little bit better, because then you don't get the black from the Stabilo, you know, reactivating into your paint. But I needed to see the flowers again. I felt like when I was looking at it, it was just, you know, like there was semblance of flowers, obviously, but the paint was just kind of overtaking, you know, my brain, I guess, and I couldn't see what was actually going on, so I needed to kind of outline it in the black. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just felt better for me, especially that bottom flower with that bent petal. And you can see now how that really looks like that bent petal. Like, there's some dimension there, and there's some kind of movement of the bending and everything. And there you can tell that I'm like, okay, what do I do next? What am I good? Just tapping my pencil around. So I brought back my picture, and I'm adding in those things. And let me Google that really quick. Stamens. They're called stamens. I never would have gotten there. And I know a few of you that know are probably screaming it at your computer or wherever you're watching this, and are like, they're called stamens. So I'm adding those back in while looking at the picture, just to make sure that I'm putting them in kind of correctly. because I don't want to just like go in and add these lines that are just going all sorts of wonky ways, because I really am trying to get like the essence of these flowers, because I've never been super great at growing things, and it's only in the last few years that my garden has really taken off. And this year I planted these lily bulbs, and I was just so excited for them to bloom because they were growing so much, and had these giant stems, and I was just waiting and waiting and waiting, and finally they opened, and I was just so excited. So this is kind of like an homage to that, I guess, which maybe sounds silly, but it's so awesome to see these beautiful flowers that, you know, you planted and are, you know, like nurturing and getting to grow, and they're growing, and, you know, come out, and they're just so beautiful with their colors and inspiring. And when you look at them, like the petals, the color of the petals, like you can see these different colors of orange and pink and yellow, and I just wanted to kind of give a recreation, a good something, you know, to that in my journal. While I was just talking about all of that, I added some of those little dots with a Stabilo pencil from the, because if you look at the lily, there's all these little like specks and like freckles almost, so I wanted to add that in. And now I'm just taking some yellow and orange, and I'm adding color to my stamens, and I'm going to, now the pencil that I used to add them in, perhaps I should have used a regular pencil. It is a Stabilo Graphite pencil, which means, just like every other Stabilo pencil, that it is reactivated when it is wet. So I get some of that gray color kind of mixing in with my yellow and orange, but that's okay. So yellow and orange tend to be, at least in my experience of the ones that I have, a little transparent, so you have to layer them a little bit to really get them to pop out. So here I'm actually using some Dina Weekly colors. I've got lemon and cheddar, and I'm just sort of mixing them together to provide, you know, that color variation. I don't necessarily want like this bright orange or anything, but I also want there to be some contrast against the petals and the pink of the petals. So I'm just trying to kind of think about that while I'm doing this. Okay, so now I'm happy with my flowers and I want to work on the background a little bit. I felt like the background was a little bland, which I sort of started it out that way anyway. I just kind of did something simple, so that way it wasn't just a plain nothingness in the background. So, although it could have been, and then I could have painted around it, but that's not the point. So I'm adding this collage tissue. I love having words in my backgrounds, whether it's from vintage paper or, you know, a stencil or whatever. And so I was going through my tissue stash and found these word tissues from Dina Wakley, and I decided to use these in my background, and I'm just using some fluid matte medium to add them so that you can still see some of the background underneath. And you'll see, like, it's a little not integrated into the background, but we are going to fix that with some paint. So we're going to add some color variation there, and it'll make the collage tissue blend in a little better. So now I'm taking my brush, and this time I'm going to wet it so that the paint flows a little bit better. And we've got that turquoise, the same turquoise I used a little bit in the stems. And I also have just a tad of that gray blue, light gray blue on my palette to sort of mix it together. So that way it's not just like bam, turquoise on top of this other color. So just adding a little bit of that back in, and then I have some white, and I'm just popping it around with my brush. I'm gonna go around the petals and kind of let the paint flow a little bit. I'm not getting it too wet because I know I have the Stabilo pencil around my flowers, and I don't want that to start running, but I do want the paint to flow around the flowers a little bit. And you can see how over on that left side that paint helped push the collage tissue into the background a little bit better, so that way it looks a little more, like I was talking about, more integrated into the background, like it kind of was always there, rather than I just plopped it on top. And I decided that I wanted to keep the lighter paint color more towards the top of the bunch of flowers, so like the top maybe 2/3, and I didn't want to bring it down too far in the bottom because I felt like maybe that gave more of a idea of like a sky, and maybe even just more interest when you're looking at it, but that, you know, the light is kind of coming from there and the sky is there, and, you know, that sort of thing. So I love my flowers, but I felt like they were kind of flat, so I took this soft pastel, and just added some lines, some like highlighting lines onto the petals, and I felt like that brought some extra dimension and flair to them. So lastly, I was looking at the background and decided it still needed a little something. So I used this garden mosaic stencil from Dina Wakley and some, I think that's Titan Buff Deep or like a parchment, something like that. And I'm stenciling really lightly onto the background just to add, you know, extra something. And I feel like because it's like, it kind of looks like those garden stones you see, you know, in people's gardens, that it goes with the theme of the page, and it doesn't, you know, take away from the focal point of the lilies. So now I'm just going to use my palette paper to kind of block my lilies, because I felt like I needed, you know me, I needed some splatters in the background, but I didn't want them to go over the lilies and potentially ruin them. So I decided to just add them in the background, and so I'm using the palette paper to protect the flowers and just sprinkling some Lindy's stamping spray in the background. And then that's it. We're done. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, this video for this month, and I hope you feel inspired. Maybe I'll link the picture in the YouTube channel for you to look at, or maybe you feel inspired to paint flowers from your own garden. But I can't wait to see what you create. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for watching.